All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today we have the amazing Renee with us. She is a transformational coach and shaman, and today we are actually going to explore everything about leadership, specifically for women, but not only. If you're a man and you're listening, that's absolutely okay as well. I'm sure you'll find some beautiful gold nuggets. And we are going to explore many things, limiting beliefs that some people might have around leadership, some fears we might have, feminine and masculine energies, boundaries, team dynamics, and all the things that go into being a woman in a position of leadership. And so, welcome, Renee. I would love to invite you to start maybe by telling us a little bit about you, about your path, about how you came to do what you do.
Well, it's quite a story in and of itself. So I actually have a consulting business in a very male-dominated industry, gas, oil, chemical, petrochemical. I found it to be quite a toxic environment for me, personally, and I ended up shifting into a leadership role because of a very toxic boss that I had, or a series of bosses that I had that were quite toxic. And I enjoyed what I was doing, but I wanted to do something different, right? I wanted to lead in a way that was more honoring of who I am as a woman without having to put the man suit on, right? So that's kind of how I ended up in the leadership role. I never expected to be in leadership. And from there, I realized that it was easier said than done. Like I didn't know what leadership looked like that was different. Right? So that's kind of how the whole thing got started in a nutshell.
I have a question. Was there like ever a moment where you kind of realized you're like, so what I thought leadership should be like, or the traditional way of, being in a leadership position, that doesn't quite work for me? Or like some kind, it's like, was there like a turning point where like, I've been doing it this way, but it's not that?
There's actually a couple different places in my journey that has been that. So most every person that I have worked with in the past has been in that more patriarchal, toxic, very masculine heavy, even the women in the very masculine heavy. And I say the masculine, but the traditional style leadership that's more competition driven, more, bottom dollar, not really care about the person. If you can't cut it, you're out kind of thing. And the exception to that was a male boss that I had who just really knew that he wanted more connection and he wanted more communication. So that was the first and only time that I ever saw leadership in a different manner. But I didn't know, when you take leadership courses, it's geared around finances and marketing and, understanding those kinds of things. And so even though I have a master's degree in global enterprise management, there was nothing that talked to me about connection.
Mm.
And so the big turning point for me came when I worked. So I had this example, this little example of what good looked like. And the turning point came when I was working for somebody, and I can tell you the exact time and day. It was June 29th, 2009 at 9:37 a.m.
Oh my goodness,
I
what
had a
happened?
boss. Yeah, right. So specific. And, this boss of mine just screamed at me over the phone. All of the management was on the call. And as everybody was hanging up the phone because they didn't want to bear witness to it because they also had been in that position, I realized there had to be something different. And I didn't know quite what it was, but I was going to find out. I was going to figure it out. And so that started me on this journey to something different.
And so how did that journey evolve? And I'm curious, did you stay at that job or is it something that you're like, okay,
6 months.
like
6 months. Yeah.
you stayed for a little bit longer? Wow. And
Yeah. It took 6 months to set up the LLC or the corporation and get all of the ducks in a row and all of that. But yeah, 6 months.
But you already knew at that point that this was the breaking point and you're no longer available to receive
Yeah,
that time.
yeah, yeah. That
And
it
I
was.
have a question. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you, but
It's okay.
I have a question. Like when you said you had received that little example of like what an alternative type of leadership could look like, how did that land on your nervous system? Out of curiosity, back in the time where you were still mainly in this like very competitive, because competitive can be good, but from what I'm hearing you say, it's not that it's not like a healthy competitive. It's like a very toxic type of
Yeah,
extract-based model.
yeah. So it's interesting that that small snippet that I had, that 2 year period, was right out of university. I was an older student, so I had already had several jobs with several different people in several different industries. And for me, it was the first time that I felt like I was valued, right?
Mm,
Like truly valued. We sat down, we had conversations. If I had a question, I there was no fear in asking the question, how do I do this, or why do you want me to do this, right? So none of that happened. It was a more of a mutual kind of thing. So he figured out very quickly that I could speak his language, so to speak, and so we had a lot of camaraderie and collaboration, and it just was a very different place. So after leaving him, because I we ended up moving to another state, I ended up working for another series of toxic people, and so after having that brief 2 year period where I felt safe, which is it seems weird to say that. It almost feels weird for me to say that, but um, that's how I felt. I felt safe. I felt like I could voice my opinion, voice my beliefs. I could, just be me, which was really quite valuable.
And do you think that this is something, the spaciousness to just be yourself was something that was missing from the previous working spaces? Was there like a performance aspect?
There was absolutely a performance aspect to this as well. The difference was that the there was constant communication back and forth. So if I felt like there was a challenge in meeting the performance issue, I could speak to him and say, "Hey, this is what's going on, and this is why, and this is where things are going, and I have to go this way to get to that type of thing," as opposed to just simply, "I don't care,"
Mm,
right? And so after working for him and going to work in the gas and oil industry, it became very performative and performance driven. And if I didn't meet quotas, right, I was at the risk of losing job. And so it was just you're constantly on edge when you're in that
mhm,
situation. You don't feel like you can talk to the boss and say, "Hey, this is what's going on. I had this snag in the data and it didn't come out the way I anticipated, so now I have to do something different." They don't care. Some people just don't care.
mm. Okay, I understand. And so I have a question because you were saying, okay, so you realized all of this and then you went and you created something else. And so you stayed for 6 months in the other company and then you shifted. What happened after?
Oh, so at first, I knew that I wanted something different. I didn't quite know how that looked. None of my training had given me, I mean, other than the 2 years, right? None of my training had given me the information that I needed. So I knew that I didn't want it to be so quota driven. I wanted more collaboration. And so when I hired somebody in, that was my intent. The challenge was that the person who came in came from a previous workplace and was very quota driven. And so there a couple of different things happen. One is that um, when I tried to speak up and say, because I was the boss, I own the company, when I said, "No, I want it done this way," the pushback was, well, I've done it this way for 20 plus years. I know better than you do. And so I wasn't firm in my own skin, right? So while I wanted something different, I didn't quite know how to get there. And so that's kind of what led to this journey of this, figuring out what does feminine leadership look like? How do I lead in a way that is not that toxic masculine and honors my feminine, and energy and embodiment? And how do I get there from A to B?
Wow, that is so profound because when we look historically, um, leadership positions and being a business owner for I don't know, maybe except like the past couple of like recent decades was mainly
Yeah.
dominated by men. And this is not to say that all men are toxic, but there is definitely
Mhm.
this element of toxic masculinity that you can find in those positions. And so when
Yeah.
all of a sudden you're like, no, I want to do things differently, but what does that look like? There is honestly, sometimes just now there is more and more, but I imagine when you started, there was like literally almost no examples of like what this could actually look like. So you were kind of a pioneer and you had to reinvent, but I imagine it also must have been a lot of examining and exploring your own limiting beliefs and your own like where do I even start? What do I believe? Let me, maybe deconstruct a lot of the things that I used to believe and I used to carry because now
Yeah.
that you are in this position of leadership, you have no choice. You're there, okay? And so I really believe that entrepreneurship is the biggest gateway into personal development because it will take everything you have inside of you, put it into your face, and like if you cannot face it, you cannot go through
Mhm.
it, you cannot alchemize it, you literally cannot grow your business. And so
Right.
I'm super curious, like what were the maybe like top two or three limiting beliefs that you
Mhm.
had before when you were like in this masculine type of environment that shifted when you went and you started, leading, but from the feminine? What was the change? What was the shift?
Well, what are the top two? I was like,
I'm
where
sure
do I
there's a
begin?
lot, honey.
Oh, where do I
I'm
begin?
sure there's a lot.
Um, I think it's in all honesty, right? So worthiness, of course, right? So worthiness, of course, is one because as a woman, we're pushed down, we're shoved down, we're quieted, we're silenced, we're all of those things. Now, honey, what are people gonna think? I got asked that question, what are people gonna think? And because I was the business owner, my husband worked and stayed home and took care of kids and still does, by the way. There's a lot of, well, what are the neighbors going to think? And what are the other parents going to think? It's like, well, I don't know. So worthiness was a big thing for me. But while I'm saying that, what I realized was the big thing for me is that um, I had shrunk myself down so far because so all through school I was a top student. And I don't say this to brag, and so here's me saying this was my issue, right? I was afraid of bragging, I was afraid of sounding whatever, and I used to literally make mistakes on math and science problems and or not turn in homework in order to be more normal in class.
Mm.
I'm 6 foot tall, so I'm very tall, and I was always slender, and I, was in choir, and I was playing music, and I, played the piano, and all of these different things. So, in a society that says, "Oh, you're an overachiever, and you're this," I started to shrink down and think, okay, then my voice is not valid. My voice is not worthy of being this person. And so when I found myself in a leadership role now and got pushback on it from employees, it's like, well, who am I to say? I'm
Wow.
just, yes, I'm the business owner, but who am I to say, he's got all this experience. I'm new to the industry, and right. So they kind of go together, that shrinking down and the worthiness. So
Mm.
yeah, very much so.
And so what was the shift for you? Like what is the thing that you're like, this is not working? Like now that I'm seeing that maybe there's parts of me that feel unworthy, maybe there's parts of me that I'm censoring who I am, I'm censoring myself, and I cannot lead from that position. I cannot create as much of an impact as I could if I'm still censoring myself, diluting myself, shrinking myself. What was the shift for you?
So there were two big events. One, I wanted to fire somebody, and why? Because it was just it was taking me back into that toxic, and it just literally would make my stomach hurt when I had to deal with this person. And so I wanted to fire this person. This person talked me into, well, it's not fair. I did all this and, all of the stuff. So again, I stepped back in, I've been doing this for so long. I helped you build this business. How could you do this to me? So again, I stepped kind of back into that worthiness. And it took me about a month before I was like, letting him stay was a huge mistake. Right.
Mm.
And so that was one of the things. And then I had hired a woman who she would stand and her shoulders were like shrunk. My height, beautiful woman. And she would stand like this. And physically seeing her with the shoulders like this and, kind of shrinking herself down, I was like, I have to be an example for this young woman. She is younger than me. I know it was, she is younger than me. And so I found myself when I was around her with my shoulders back, head tall, and saying, hey, look, this is when you present yourself to a client, otherwise they're not going to see the value in who you are. I see who you are. Do
Mm.
this, right? So kind of those things happen more or less in the same time period, about a year kind of time frame. And it was a huge shift for me to understand that, wow, I literally was shrinking myself down physically, energetically, emotionally, verbally. And now I can do this.
Very interesting. So, in a way, did she mirror to you your inner stance of
Yeah.
like, oh, this is what I am doing energetically. This is how I am. And so, on an ener on an energetic level, I mean, we are all able to, even if we're not conscious, we all are able to sense and perceive the
Mhm.
energies of other people. And so, if you are energetically shrinking yourself in a
Yeah.
position of leadership, it's going to be very difficult to lead. And so you had this person who literally mirrored that to you, but like in a physical form. Yeah, and I'm very curious also, when you said you had to fire someone, what are some limiting beliefs and fears that women, because as more and more women step into the position of leadership, what are some limiting beliefs or fears they might experience, and what can you help them like when they have to? Because it will happen. Sometimes we might hire people who are not aligned, who are not who we thought they were. It's just part of holding a business that is growing. Sometimes we will need support and it's not always a fit. And so this is a situation that might happen the more a business grows. And so definitely I can see how somebody who has a lot of fear of like around worthiness, a lot of people's pleasing, a lot of I'm not enough, that might seem like a very scary thing to do to fire someone. Could you tell us a little bit more about this?
Yeah, so um, it's core limiting beliefs and it's having good boundaries. And so if you don't have good boundary, well, first, if your core limiting beliefs are still driving you, you don't have good boundaries. It's just the way it is.
Mm.
You can't have good boundaries and let your core limiting beliefs drive your life.
But what could be the core limiting beliefs you're referring to here?
Worthiness is some form of worthiness, whether it's I have the right to,
Hmm.
or I'm smart enough.
Mm.
I've spoken to several women that are like, oh well, Renee, you have a math degree, a physics degree, you speak all these languages, you're so smart and blah blah blah, and I'm just me. And I'm like, okay, do you recognize your brilliance, right? So a lot of times, because we've spent so much time shrinking ourselves down, we don't even recognize our own brilliance.
Mm.
And everybody that I speak to is brilliant in their own way, but, and I choose that word carefully, they don't see it. or they're afraid to see it. Maybe they see glimpses of it, but because they've been told, you're aggressive, when they're just being assertive, or, you're being, people are jealous. And so you're being a show off. When I was a kid, I was a show off. My grandfather always said I was a show off. And so we shrink ourselves down, that core limiting belief of I'm too much, I'm not enough, I'm too smart, not smart enough, I'm too pretty, not pretty enough. It's a worthiness of some kind.
Mhm.
And so when we have that, it's very difficult to set boundaries that honor us. And
Mm.
that inability to set boundaries. Now, I got really good at setting boundaries in my professional life because I could see worthiness there over a period of time, right? And then I had to figure out how to translate into my private life. Now, other people can go the other direction. So figuring out I whatever the case might be, where our limiting belief is and what it might be about, and
Mhm.
then figuring out how to set that boundary is really the key to being able to fire someone or even hire somebody that's in alignment with you. You might hire somebody that you think is going to be really great and find out, well, they're really not a very nice person. I don't want to work with them. They might be phenomenal at their job, but if their values are such that, they're out of integrity with what you're doing, then yeah,
Mhm. It's not a good fit.
it's not a good fit. Yeah.
Mhm. And so, for somebody who is, then, if I'm understanding you correctly, somebody who's just maybe like in a position where, oh, I might have to fire someone, the biggest takeaway is like, okay, start by looking at your own core beliefs. Start by exploring what kind of limiting beliefs you might have. If ever firing someone feels difficult and challenging, it is probably showing you that there is a little boundary, misalignment within yourself in terms
Mhm.
of like, oh, I'm so afraid to set a certain boundary, and therefore I'm afraid of, maybe firing that person. Do you think it could also be maybe connected to the fear of rejection?
Oh, absolutely.
Mm,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, and it's not just fear of rejection, there's a fear like letting go of this person, that the first person that I fired. I was so afraid that I was making a mistake that was going to impact my business, that I continued to keep working with this person. And the problem was that that person and I were so out of alignment, it was making me physically ill. So while on the one level, he appeared to be good for the business, on another level, if I was physically ill, then it wasn't, right? And so the fear of upsetting him, the fear of upsetting clients, the
mm,
fear of making a mistake, all of those were wrapped up in that rejection, that worthiness, that, whatever the case might be. I could label so many different things that are somehow tied to that. It's just, yeah, very much so.
I can just see how many women would navigate that situation. It is a tough one, especially that as women, since we're small, we're kind of programmed and conditioned into being, people's pleasers and the good girl and saying yes and
No,
not
yeah,
being too displeasing. And so that is like all of a sudden you're like, oh, all of those things have to be all of them at once.
right.
But I think deeper than that, it goes to do I truly respect myself? Do I truly believe also in the respect of the other person? The way that I see that is that um, it is never in integrity to not set a boundary because it is also out of integrity to the other person. Because on a soul
Right.
level, both souls feel that there is a mismatch. They both feel that there is a lack of integrity. And so the faster you're able to actually communicate this and to be um, really honest, even if it's raw, even if it's uncomfortable, I think on a soul level, this is the biggest form of respect you can show to the other.
Yeah.
But it's a
Absolutely.
process. I can totally see how this is a process to go.
Yeah. Yeah, well, when boundaries are crossed, that's where conflict arises, right? And
Yeah.
being able to communicate, like you said, very quickly, very clearly can help eliminate some of the conflict or even allow you to shift through some of those things. So,
Mm.
yeah.
And I'm curious, like, besides those two experiences, what was there something else that helped you move through the limiting beliefs and shift through them?
Well, so yeah, I mean, I've done several different things. Breath work, I think would be the one that I would come back to time and time again. Um, and I've also done inner child journeying, and I've done, just I've done a lot of different types of healing work in general. And so when I'm when I'm working with somebody, depending on what's going on and what their time frame is and what their goals are, and whatever the case is for them, or if they've even figured out what their core limiting beliefs are, right? So even sometimes even figuring that out is a challenge. And
Mhm.
so there's, a variety of things that can take a person through all of that. And for me, I had to explore different ways of doing that. And so, like in the case of the breath work for me allowed me to just see a bunch of different things, right? Um, a lot of stuff to come up. Then, doing inner child journeying as well. Once you reckon, you know, you know how powerful that is, right?
Oh, yeah.
Oh gosh, it's one of those things I love and hate at the same time. Um, and I really, really, really put off doing an inner child journey because I
Mhm.
knew there was a part of me that knew that it was going to just crack me open. And so I put it off for a long time before I finally did it. But yeah, so different things for sure, and how to figure it out and then how to shift through it. And,
Mhm.
shifting through it a lot of times can be mirror work. I do a lot of mirror work, and I work with people in doing mirror work because you're working with the mirror neurons, that reflect back what you say to yourself, and so it's really there's some powerful things out there, some powerful tools, and I love to work with them all. So again, a lot of it depends on my goal at that moment, or was working someone else their goal.
So, would you suggest to someone who is perhaps experiencing all those things to explore different modalities, different tools, and see what works for them specifically?
I think so. And like I explored, and if they're in a hurry to get something done, then work with somebody, right? If they
Always the
have the
fastest path.
time and the desire and they really want to explore all these different things. I mean, this sort of thing didn't happen in my world when I was first starting out. There weren't coaches out there to help with this. I didn't have you in the background that I could say, hey, Nat, I need some help. Right. So none of that happened when I was going through and figuring all of this out. So for me, it was literally going through books and reading books, or I would run into a healer somewhere and I'd say, oh, what's that modality? I don't know anything about that. And so I would explore it and I would take and tweak things to fit my world. Right. So even when I say to somebody, yes, do an inner child journey, even that for me looks different than what it would look like for you because I've taken and tweaked things.
You
Because
made it your own. And I think
yeah,
this is the best way also. It's like you adapt it to what your specific human needs. It's not like a one size fit
yeah,
all. It's so
yeah.
individual. And so I'm really curious talking about all of this. Um, how do you now, like with all the knowledge that you have, all the experience you accumulated through all these years, how would you define feminine leadership in your own words?
Ooh. Um,
What is it to you?
so feminine leadership to me, it's not even about being female, right? So my best boss was a man who was very much in his divine feminine,
Mm,
right? And his divine masculine. So feminine leadership to me is that connectedness. And
mm,
so when you embody feminine leadership, when you embody the divine leadership, maybe it shouldn't even be feminine, but when you embody that divine leadership, there's a connectedness with source energy, God, goddess, all that is, higher self, whatever, however you want to define that for you. And the intuition flows, right? So it's that ability to shift and move and to see and connect and collaborate and to have the empathy and compassion and strength. Because let's face it, those of us that are moms, we know that we would absolutely kill if it meant saving our child. I'm sorry, there are people that are bothered by that, but right, if it was my child and somebody else, I'm going to pick my child every time. And so there's that fierceness that women have too. And
Mama bear
so,
energy.
yeah, that mama bear energy. And boy, my children have seen some of it. So, you know, the mama bear energy. So, feminine energy isn't soft. It's
Mhm,
it has a soft aspect. It's also fierce and
mm,
strong. And so I think when I say divine, divine feminine energy, it is that all of who we are,
mm,
that all of who we are. It's
mm,
not, it's not this rigid, this is what leadership is. It's allowing for, I had an employee as an example who just kind of fell off the face of the earth and I was about to fire him because legally I could. He just disappeared. And so finally I got a hold of him and he had gotten in touch with his adopted family. They contacted him and it just blew his mind. And so me having compassion for who he is as a person, we were able to kind of work through some things and
mm.
get him back on track and get him moving forward with everything, whereas other people in the old traditional style would have just axed him, said you're done.
Hmm. So it's
So
like this beautiful balance between having boundaries, but also having compassion and having like this humane aspect that is also brought in.
absolutely, it's more
Like, let's
holistic.
communicate, let's explore, let's see if
Mhm.
there is a need for support, maybe from my part, but also not letting go of, your own vision, your own clarity, your own
Right.
fierceness, your own boundaries. While I'm guessing from what you shared in the very traditionally masculine, worlds, it is this compassion aspect, this communication aspect is often disregarded and is not present. And I'm really curious, like it actually makes me think of another question for you. Why do you think, the traditional leadership trainings and like mostly built by men, done by men, uh, what about them often might leave women feel disconnected or inadequate? What do you think the difference is?
Well, so for a couple of things, I do believe that we are wired differently.
Mm,
I do believe that we're wired differently. Now, that's not to say, like, I have a very masculine energy for a woman, right? And whereas you have a very soft feminine energy. So, we can step into either or, but that the competitive masculine energy, and I know women that are very competitive. I'm not to say that it's not. The problem is that when we are so on one side of the fence and ignore the other side, like you have very solid boundaries, which is a more traditionally male kind of concept, right? So when you're way over on one side of the fence, ignoring the other side, it becomes toxic.
mm,
And so that's where the toxic patriarchal versus the doormat woman, right? So it's kind of those wounded energies that mirror each other.
Like two extremes. I would love for you to expand a little bit more on that. Like, what does like the toxic masculine look like to you? Because there is so many definitions being thrown
Oh yeah.
around. And so, and what is like this, but also sometimes toxic feminine, which is something we might not talk so much about, Like we talk a lot about toxic masculine, but there's also the toxic feminine. Like, what
Oh,
do
yeah.
those two represent to you versus what is like the divine masculine, divine feminine in your perspective, specifically even more when it's in business?
Yeah, so the divine, I'll start with the toxic. So the toxic masculine, and whether it's man or woman that's doing this, right, is that bottom dollar, I don't care. You meet this quota or you're out. They don't want to hear excuses. I mean, when your kid has a when your kid's sick and you can't get to work, it's an excuse to somebody who's in a toxic kind of that toxic energy. They're also often quite aggressive and domineering. And so in a working environment, it can come across, I mean, literally, I've had people scream at me, right? Because I did something that was out of alignment with what they thought I should do. In the opposite extreme of that, the toxic feminine, I've had the toxic feminine where there's always an excuse, they're always whining. And when I see somebody in leadership, right? So I've had women that are in that toxic masculine energy. Okay, so I just want to be clear. I'm not saying men only. I've had women bosses that were in that toxic masculine, but I've also worked for women that were in the toxic feminine, where they're very manipulative, they're very condescending, they're very jealous. I had a boss, she's really short, very petite, I'm very tall. And the big boss came and he looked to me as the boss, the manager of that area. And she absolutely flipped out, even though, she was clearly the boss, not me, because of my stature, right? And so that that became this competition in a different manner. Now she had to completely tear me down to just be very vicious. She became very vicious and nasty, that toxic feminine, right? So when you see that you're in that, you can shift into the divine, right? And the divine masculine is protective energy. It's supportive energy. You think of the man that wants to support and lift up the women, like my boss, right? There's also this wonderful, beautiful assertiveness as opposed to aggressiveness, right? And a woman who's in her divine feminine has really solid boundaries and lots of compassion, right? So men and women can be in either any of those four categories. And usually if you're in the toxic masculine, you also carry the toxic feminine energy somewhere. If you're in the divine masculine, you also have your divine feminine. So, that
They
they
kind of
mirror
go
each
hand
other.
in hand, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, that's such an
Absolutely.
interesting perspective and definition. I don't think I ever heard that specific way of explaining this, and I see how this can play into the work dynamics and
Oh,
leadership
yes.
dynamics. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Um, so how how does the feminine, like the divine feminine leadership, like principle, how do we navigate conflict and team dynamics? You touched a little bit on it, but I would love to hear more. Like, what was your take on it? Like, what has shifted? What has changed? And now you feel like, okay, I want to actually lead the business from maybe more like the divine aspect, and even if we want to use another word besides divine, like it could also be like more integrated, more conscious, more
Right. Aligned,
optimized, yes, for
yeah.
example. Then how do you navigate like those conflicts and those team dynamics within groups?
So it starts with having clear boundaries,
Hmm.
right? So honestly, to be able to manage conflict starts by having very clear boundaries.
Mhm.
And when you have clear boundaries and you can communicate it clearly, then it becomes very obvious to people where that is. Now, if you, okay, sometimes you have to be willing to shift a little bit because circumstances, happen. But as long as those boundaries remain, the rigidity of the boundaries are around your integrity, right?
Mhm.
What you define as integrity. So your definition of integrity might be slightly different than my definition of integrity. So get very clear about what is integrity for you,
So
right?
you
So
even
you
start with
start
the
there.
clarity for yourself.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people might not even have this clarity within themselves. They don't even know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
It's always interesting to me to see how people expect other people to know what they're thinking or expect other people to know, hey, that was rude, right? That was rude. Well, they may not have found it to be rude because you didn't clarify for them that this is your boundary, right?
Mm.
You didn't say, hey, this is how I expect to be spoken to. And you don't have to say, hey, this is how I expect to be spoken to, right? But you show that. And then when somebody crosses that boundary, you say, actually, I would appreciate, and if you would not, like, I don't particularly like the F bomb, right? I use it on
Mhm.
occasion, but when somebody's using it over and over and over, I'm like, I, I'm okay. I understand, people use it. I use it as well. But when you're using it every third word, sorry, I'm not okay with that. And
Mhm.
so I'm being clear about my boundary, right?
Mhm.
And that's just a very simple example, but there are many other examples like that where you can be clear. You have to be very clear about your time. I'm my kids all know if my door is closed, they may knock, lightly. And if I say, go ahead and come in, then it's okay. If I don't answer, they know, right? So
Mhm.
I'm very clear about certain boundaries. And I think when women, we're so used to taking care of everything and everyone all of the time, we forget that we get to take care of us too. And our energy and our boundaries are just as important as someone else's. And when we're in leadership, it's even more important.
Mm. And I have a question because you have a book coming up, right?
Yeah.
Is this something you dive deeper into in your book? Do you explore a little bit the dynamics? Like what is your book a little bit more about? I would love to hear what are the gold nuggets we can find in there? Because this
Yeah.
is such a complex and important theme, and this is such a complex topic, and there's just so much about it that I know we've been chatting for like half an hour, but there is so much to cover. And so I'm really curious if somebody's like have been listening to this and it's like, oh gosh, like I think I need to gain some clarity, first of all, on my own, like what does integrity does it even mean to me? Then I need to start getting clear on my boundaries. Then I need to start communicating those boundaries. What else is in your book? What do you explore in there? Tell us more.
So, oh, well, a lot. Yeah, a lot. There's a lot in there, a lot of different techniques. I share kind of my journey and how I got there and what techniques I used to get
Mhm.
there. Right. So when you were asking different techniques different things, what did I do? Well, those are literally things that I've done in the past. And so there's exercises throughout the book as well. But,
Mhm.
core limiting beliefs, dealing with that first, right? So we start there. And there's a couple different processes to help you get clearer and clearer about your core limiting beliefs and then how to shift out of them, right?
Mhm.
So I share quite a bit in there about that. And because I feel like that if you don't get clear about that and work on it, then it's very difficult to move to the other places, right? And so
Mhm.
I wanted people to really understand that. And then the next section that I really shift into is that energy between the masculine and feminine. And recognizing, like I had to recognize when I was in a toxic place, right? And
Mhm.
and there are definitely things in my life where I'm like, ooh, I didn't like how I did that, right? And so recognizing that and having grace for yourself. I think
Wow.
this is another thing that women, we tend to do, right, is beat ourselves up.
Mm. Yeah, our inner punisher.
Oh my gosh. Oh, yes. So yeah, very, very much feel that being able to do that is really important. And then some of the language that reflects that, right? So I use that as well. Talk about some of that, and then finally go into some of the actual team dynamics and setting boundaries and how to do it and what does that look like and why. And so there's just a lot of different things in there in general. It's a lot of fun.
Wow. Wow. That feels like such a powerful offering for anybody who is navigating this entrepreneurship deal, doesn't know how to go about it. And I so second you that everything really begins with uncovering our own limiting beliefs, because I do believe that um, our life is literally the emanation and the mirroring of our inner world. And it's life meets us at our lowest standard, right? So
Yes.
everything in our life is a reflection of like our lower standard. And that ties in a lot with what you touched upon at the beginning of our chat, which was like the worthiness aspect. Am I worthy to have more? Am I worthy to even ask for those things? Is this actually my standard or is it somebody else's standard? There's just so
Yes.
many things to start uncovering. And so, I can only see how powerful it is to like have some kind of book or some kind of tool that will help us like explore what those limiting belief might look like, then understand how they play out in the dynamics. This is really, really potent. Thank you, Renee, for taking the time to actually write this book and create that.
Mm.
And I have a question, like before we finish our beautiful chat, if the women and the men who are watching could shift one thing in their leadership starting today, what would you recommend?
Well,
Like,
that's a
what was
good
the thing that was
question.
like
That's a
so
really good
powerful
question.
to you?
I would say that being able to pivot,
Mm.
right? Being able to pivot, to recognize, okay, today I did this, it's not in alignment. Recognizing when you're not in alignment with something and learning how to pivot. And as crazy as it sounds, I there's a process that I got actually from Abraham Hicks, right? But I've changed, of course, changed it, right? Because I'm a very visual person. So for me, right, when I recognize that, oh, I did something I'm not in alignment with my own standards, my own belief systems, right? I literally will turn and shift and get a new perspective.
Wow.
It's,
I love this.
yeah,
I am so going to implement this and try that. It makes me think of something. I think it was Albert Einstein who said to do the same thing over and over
yeah.
again, expecting different results is, did he say stupid?
Definition of insanity.
Definition of insanity.
Yep.
And so, like reflecting back on my own journey, like so many times in entrepreneurship, I was like, oh, so I did this, so maybe I just need to do it 10 times more, the same thing.
Right.
And then I would just amplify that thing that was actually not necessarily working. And it's like, no, because you do more times the same thing that is not working, it is not going to be working
I'm going to
right.
change.
You literally need to change and do something completely radically different. And so I really love this like literal example of like, oh no, you just turn and look at a different perspective. I am so going to use that. I love, love, love this. And I can absolutely relate to how this is probably one of the most potent advice you can give to somebody in leadership. Don't be afraid to pivot and pivot. Like if something is not working, pivot, pivot.
Change. Do something different.
Yeah, and we have
Yeah,
like we often have this tendency of staying too long and repeating the same thing, hoping for a different result. But then I
exactly.
remind myself of Einstein. I'm like, nope. Pivot. Now I'm gonna have you in my head too. I'm gonna like
Pivot. Yeah.
amazing, amazing, amazing. Thank you so much, Hannah,
Oh,
for sharing this time
thank you
with
so much. Yeah.
Such a pleasure, and I cannot wait for your book to come out. I'm sure it's going to be so service and so full of incredible information that will help transform lives of those who read it. Where could they find it? Where could they find you? What else do you offer of services maybe for women or men? How do you support them? Do you want to tell us a little bit more about how they can stay connected with you?
Yeah, so thank you for that. So yes, the book is Becoming a Female CEO,
Mhm.
Life, Business, and Intuition, and is on Amazon for the moment. And it actually comes out on the 9th. I'm very excited about it.
Amazing.
So yeah, so December 9th for 2 days, it'll be 99 cents, and then the price goes up.
Um,
Uh, then I can literally be found on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, even on TikTok now. I now have officially have a TikTok account. I'm like,
yeah.
okay, that's kind of fun. And YouTube, right? So all of the different channels I can be found, and I work with people in leadership. So I have a leadership course, but I also do breath work and Reiki, different kinds of healing modalities with people if that's really what their focus is. And and I enjoy that just as much. So, doing the leadership or doing the healing work, whichever way. And a lot of times the leadership work is healing work. So, depending on what somebody's goal is, we go from there. But I do have a course specific that is, about unshakable women. And so I'm
Mm,
yeah, I'm very excited about it as well because there's just so much. I've seen so much shift already for people, and it's just
mm.
uh, anyway. So
Oh,
it's
it's
very
visual.
exciting.
Very exciting.
Yeah, it's very exciting. So
Oh,
yeah, a wide variety of ways to get a hold of me or get in touch with me and go from there. So
amazing. Thank you so much, Renee, for taking the time to be here, for sharing. And I'll add all the links somewhere below for those who want to stay connected with Renee. Wishing you all a beautiful, beautiful day. Bye.
thank you. Bye bye.
All right. I'm gonna stop
Yeah,
recording.
I'm